Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Stitched in Sweden. I'm Maria, your host, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as mmonska. The show notes for this week and all other weeks are on the blog, which is stitchedinsweden.blogspot.com. We have a Ravelry group, which you can find in the Groups tab on Ravelry, and that is also called Stitched in Sweden. So this week I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this week in Stockholm, a couple of projects I've been working on, one finished object, technique tip, and some upcoming things. I am recording in a little bit of a different time today, so you may see some fluttering light coming through like this. Thomas is out of the house right now, so I am trying to take advantage of the quiet apartment and record, but that means that the sun is still on this side of the apartment and it's just a little bit different lighting today. So, alright, but let's start out with this week in Stockholm. So it has been a very sunny week and that's been lovely. It feels like we're finally getting a little bit of summer back, and so we tried to take advantage of that and spent some time down at the water on the dock. We had breakfast down there on Saturday morning, biked into the city and did a little bit of shopping there. Thomas had a race on Saturday, I think, and Saturday night, so it was called the Midnattsloppet, which is like midnight race in English, and it's a 10K that starts, I think the first waves maybe started around 9 p.m. or something, so it's in the dark and it's kind of strange, but he ran with a couple of his friends and I think they had a pretty good time. So I was there at the beginning. He didn't start till 10:20 or something and finished just before 11, so yeah, it was interesting to see. I mean, it's a large race. I think there was 38,000 people or something in a pretty small area, just on the street, and so there was tons of people, but it was dark, so yeah. Anyway, so that was pretty much what we did this week. We also went on a little walk yesterday to try to enjoy the sun also. We can just walk across one of the bridges and then we are sort of in a forest, I guess. There's a lot of forested areas within the city of Stockholm, which is kind of interesting, I think, for a city. So there's a nice little dirt path over there, and we just took a pretty long walk, actually. I think we walked for about 3 hours and walked along the water, and yeah, it was pretty nice. We found some blueberries and I tried them, but they were really sour compared to the ones at the summer house, so I'm not really sure why that is, but they weren't so good, so we didn't really have any more of those. Let's see, but I have done a bit of knitting this week and quite a lot of unknitting, unfortunately. Usually I don't have to rip back too much because I tend to plan and think about projects a lot before I start them, and I don't like ripping my knitting out, so I try to make sure that I know what's going to happen before I start knitting. But sometimes that doesn't work. So actually on all 3 projects that I worked on this week, I had some major ripping out to do. Anyway, I will start out with showing you the first project I'm working on, which is one that I was working on last week. And this is the small version of my new shawl design that is currently being test knit. And most of my test knitters are knitting the large size, and because I don't have a pattern really written for the small size yet, and I haven't tested it out myself, so I'm giving this a try. here it is, and I'll have the yarn for you right here. I can't pronounce the name anyway. But this is some yarn that was sent to me by my friend Carrie, and she, it's from a Finnish yarn company, but they sell the yarn around the world, so you can purchase it. And this is the automation colorway. It's in the basic sock. Anyway, so I have just about I've used a little bit more than half of the skein. And of course it's difficult to see because it's lace, but if you saw my episode last week, you saw my blocked shawl, and then you probably can get a better idea of what it looks like. But basically this shawl works with repeating sections of stockinette, this is like section A, B, A, B, A, B, and then section C is down here, and then you have section D, which is a similar but slightly different motif of section B, and then there's a picot bind off. So in the large version, I did 6 repeating sections of B before I did C and then D and the bind off. And so for the small version, and the large version is done in a light fingering, almost lace weight yarn, which has, I think, 314 yards per, let me just double check because I have it right here. So for 50 grams it is, so for 100 grams it's 575 meters. So for me that is more of a light fingering or lace weight, because a lot of times what you would consider fingering weight or a sock weight 4-ply yarn would be closer to 400 meters for 100 grams. So the large shawl took just around 113 grams, 115 grams, I think. So I wanted to try, and that was of the lighter lace weight fingering, and so in a 4-ply it would be a bit more yardage. Or more, it wouldn't be more yardage, but it would be more than 113 grams. It would be whatever, like 800 meters of, so closer to maybe like 200 or 250 grams of 4-ply or fingering weight. So I wanted to try to do a small version that could be knit out of 1 skein of fingering weight yarn, so approximately 400 meters. Because I know myself and many other people have lots of single skeins of this weight of yarn in their stash, and it's a nice size to wear, I think, for just a front sort of neckerchief style, and it's really easy to wear with a jacket. So I wanted to see if I could make a option for a smaller size as well. So I had started this last week, and I don't remember exactly how far I was, but this week I knit 4 sections of section B, and I knit all of section C, and I had started section D, and I was weighing my yarn, and it was disappearing too fast. So I had just about 11 grams left, and I still had all of section D and bind off to do, and I knew that wasn't going to be enough. So I let it sit for a couple minutes, made sure that, yeah, this really isn't going to be enough and I'm going to run out. And I ripped it back to the 3rd repeat of section B so that I could start C after that. This is all like really clearly written in the pattern, obviously, but I'm just trying to explain a little bit to you briefly. Anyway, it meant that I ripped out about 50 grams of yarn, and that's a lot for, it's half the ball. So now I'm at the point where I am just about finished with section C. I have just 1 row to go work back on the purl side, and then I need to do some more weighing of this yarn and calculating and see if I need to try to extend section C slightly before I start section D, because I would like this shawl to use most of the 400 meters of yarn. And I'm worried that because I was so close to being able to finish it with having 4 repeats, that having only 3 repeats will mean that it is quite a bit smaller. So I'm still kind of trying to figure out what I want to do with that. But I think I will work that out today and hopefully get this finished up this week. So that was a little bit frustrating because I was so close to the end of the yarn, and then I just knew that I needed to rip it out. Now, if I had been knitting this shawl just for me, if it wasn't a pattern, I probably would have tried to finish it. And I might have then had to do the picot bind off in a different color, and that would have been fine because it was just for me. And I like having a different edging, so I probably would have done it in this hot pink color or something fun like that. But since it's for a pattern, and since I really want it to be written so that you could finish it in 400 meters, I decided to rip back and rework that a bit. So that's why. But another project that I pulled back out this week, which is not knitting, but is related to yarn, is my crocheted blanket. And I haven't been showing you this because I haven't been working on it all that much, because I can only work on a couple of hexagons at a time. Otherwise, I don't know if it's just because I don't crochet very often, but I find that my wrists hurt more when I crochet than when I knit. So if I can do, 3 hexagons, and then I have to stop before my wrists will hurt a lot the next day. So here's what I have so far, and I'm just knitting this in different sock scraps, some of which have been sent by lovely viewers and some knitting friends that I have. And I'm doing the white borders for it in just the Lana Grossa or whatever sock yarn, 4-ply, in a white-ish cream color. So this is how much I have. I don't remember how much I had last time, but I have also started another little section. And this is also in an effort to reduce the strain on my wrists. When the blanket has gotten as big as it is, which is not very big, I know, but that size starts to be more difficult for me to work on the project comfortably, because I'm joining as I go. I have woven in all my ends except for these 3, so I'm keeping up with that as much as possible, which I think is pretty good. So anyway, I decided to start another section so that it would be a bit smaller and I could work on it easier, and then I'll just connect this. I'll sew it together to the other piece, and I might do like a bunch of pieces like this, so most of it will be crochet as you go connected, but some of it will be stitched together or like crochet chained together somehow, but I'll figure that out. And this little section is all yarn from Olivia of This Handmade Life, so I kind of wanted to do the yarns that she sent me all together in a section because they went so well together, and I still have quite a few that I have crocheted the circle part, and I just need to do the white part and connect it from her. So there we go. It was fun to pull that out again and work on it, and I pulled that out right about after I had ripped out the shawl and another project, which I can tell you about that now actually. So You may remember that a couple weeks ago I talked about swatching and that I had made this swatch with these nice big juicy cables. And I have a whole idea in my head of the perfect sweater that I want to have these cables on the front of it. And I started knitting that sweater this week, and it was going to be a top-down raglan with a scoop neck and long sleeves, and these cables were going to be on the front of it. But I knew that I didn't want to have the cables on the back. I wanted to have a different stitch on the back, which had a different gauge than the cables. The problem is, when you have a different gauge than on the front and on the back, then you need a different number of stitches because on the front versus the back, because cables, for example, draw fabric together, so you end up with more stitches per inch over the pattern than you do in, say, stockinette stitch or whatever, which doesn't draw it together as much. So I tried to figure out, using my nifty gauge math and whatever, of how I could make it work. And I had it all charted up and everything. And theoretically it should have worked, but it didn't work. So I knit, maybe down to here. I had separated for the sleeves and everything, and it just wasn't gonna work. So I ripped that back, and that was after having already knit. I knit part way, then I ripped back a little bit, and I knit further, and then I ripped back the whole thing. So I had probably knit about 150 grams on that, and then there was nothing. So that was a bit disappointing as well, because not only do I have nothing to show for that, but my original idea and plan with this probably isn't going to work out. And I was thinking about this because I was just convinced that I was going to be able to make it work by having a different number of stitches for the front and back and for the way that I was doing the top-down raglan, it was pretty easy to add more stitches on the front versus the back. But it just didn't work. And I was thinking about how other people manage to make patterns with cables on the front but not on the back, and I realized that many sweaters that you look at, or designs that have large cables featured in them, also have quite significant sections of eyelets or some sort of lace. And lace is often has less stitches per inch than stockinette stitch or something. So it rather than cables, which shrink the fabric together. So it could work to have cables, like panels of cables, and then having alternating with panels of lace. But because I just had such a specific idea of how I wanted this to be, and that wasn't working, I just decided I need to rip this out and rethink. So this isn't happening right now. I also kind of decided that perhaps this is not the best time to start trying to design my first adult size sweater, because I'm going to be starting school in 2 weeks. And I don't know what level of, obviously it's going to be a commitment. And my knitting time will decrease a lot. But not only that my time will go down, but I don't know what kind of brain space I will have for, that sounds weird, but I don't know what kind of, mental capacity I'm going to have or want to have for working on designing a adult sweater. So that is just going to be kind of on hold and might be permanent hold for a while. I was still really excited to work with this yarn because it's absolutely lovely, and I really wanted to keep knitting with it because I was really enjoying knitting with it. I didn't want to just rip out this sweater and then have the yarn kind of balled up and put it back in my stash and then let it sit there for a long time, because I'm really excited to work on it now. And so instead of getting hung up on that sweater and just having it be like this yarn is reserved for that sweater, which may or may never happen, may or may not ever happen, then I decided to find a different pattern that's already written and just knit somebody else's pattern. So that's what I did. I cast on the Cybella pullover, which is a pattern by Carrie Bostitch Hogue, not sure, in the Quince & Company Chickadee in the Egret colorway, which is a cream off-white color. And I'm knitting this on US size 3s and 4s, which I think is 3.5 millimeter or so. And I decided to start with the sleeves, because oftentimes when I knit a sweater, I start with the body because most patterns start with the body. And then I finish the body, and usually that's the most exciting part because it has the patterning or the detail of whatever the sweater is. And then I get stuck in the sleeve zone of either half a sleeve finished or one sleeve finished or no sleeves finished, and yeah, it's a problem. It's happened a couple of times before where I have a sweater that's been finished for a very long time except for the sleeves. So I decided, while I'm really enjoying knitting this yarn and really loving every minute of it, then I should just start with the sleeves and try to make those fun. And then I'll be able to knit the body next, and that will have like the interesting part of the pattern on it, and so I'll still be looking forward to that part of the pattern because it comes last. Here's a picture of the sweater. And here's what I have so far. So I have about probably 1 3/4 sleeves done. And I cast this one on yesterday evening. Sorry, this is just going to blow out really a lot because it's still pretty sunny on this side right now. But there you can see a little bit more of the stitch definition, and you can see some of my increases. And I was pinning the increases to match them to my other sleeve, and then I just started counting the rows. So these are stitch markers every 10 rows. Yeah, it's too bright. Anyway, I love these sleeves. So that is good. Here is the first sleeve that I knit, and you can see, again, these are where I did the increases. It fits just how I wanted it to, with some slight positive ease, but not too much. And one thing that I really don't like about sleeves, and how they're often written in patterns, is that once you do the ribbing, there's 2 inches or whatever of ribbing, and then you start directly with stockinette or something. And usually there's no decreases to get into the stockinette section. In fact, sometimes there's increases because you need to increase along the sleeve to get it wide enough for your arm, obviously. But when you go from ribbing, or at least for me, when I go from ribbing to stockinette, there's a big difference in width of fabric, or the gauge, I guess. And so a lot of times, with how patterns are written, you end up with a big sleeve pucker after the cuff. And I don't like that. I want to have a more fitted sleeve. So I do want it to be slightly looser. Like, I want to have the cuff be tighter so that it's the cuff, and that part is the fitted part, so that beyond the cuff is a little bit looser, but I don't want it to go cuff, sleeve. And I think of that as sleeve pucker, and I don't like that. The same thing happens with stockinette socks for me, and that is why in this upcoming pattern, my arrowhead sock design, I write the instructions so that you start with a larger number of stitches for the ribbing, and then you decrease directly on one round before starting the stockinette. And that's what I did. The same sort of thing with this cuff, so that I don't get the sleeve pucker. Now, I cast on a different number of stitches than suggested in the pattern because I originally cast on the number of stitches in the pattern and it was just too huge, even though I have the right gauge. Now, the other reason, or I sort of knew that I was going to have to cast on less because this pattern is written for sort of 3/4 length sleeves, and I wanted to make it a long sleeve just because for this climate it makes more sense to have long sleeves. Now, I'm very pleased with, and you're probably not going to be able to see it so well, but I did a tubular cast on for this cuff. So tubular cast on means that instead of having a hard cast on edge, I'll show you a hard cast on edge example in a minute, then you get a nice rounded edge where the stitches just travel directly over. So one way you can achieve this nice tubular cast on edge is by first doing a provisional cast on with a crochet hook and provisional yarn, just waste yarn, and then doing the steps for the tubular cast on, and then you pull out the provisional yarn. Ysolda has a really good tutorial. She has a couple of different ones on how to do a tubular cast on. One of them is the one I did, which is just the tubular cast on for 2x2 rib, and the other one she has is the long-tailed tubular cast on, which looks quite interesting to me. I watched a video that she has on it yesterday, and that one you don't need a crochet hook or provisional yarn or anything like that. You can basically start directly. I think that I'll keep doing this way for a little while, especially for this sweater, because I will do the tubular cast on for the body of the sweater as well, just because I know how to do this and I want to keep it consistent throughout. The only problem with this method is that you do end up with a little section here that will need to be sewn together at the end, but it's not really a problem because you already have the tail of the working yarn anyway, which is where you started. So it's right there and easy to sew up anyway. Just to show you the difference with a provisional tubular cast on and or not provisional tubular, but just the difference with a tubular cast on versus a normal cast on. Here's a normal cast on in 1x1 rib, and you can see that there's more of an edge, like the stitches don't just travel directly over the edge of it. It's a little bit hard to see, but when you do it on a project, it makes a huge difference. And in general, I hadn't taken the time, because it does take just slightly more time. I hadn't taken the time to do it on my own sweaters before, but when I knit Thomas's sweater last year, I decided to do the tubular cast on because that was the cast on suggested in the pattern, and even though if I was doing it for myself, I probably would have just said, like, I could just do a normal cast on. I decided to do it, and every time I see him wearing that sweater and I see the cuff cast on, it just looks so nice, and so I had it in mind that I would do the tubular cast on next time I was casting on for a garment. So that's what I've been working on. I do have one finished project this week, which is my arrowhead socks. And here they are. I am quite pleased with how these turned out. They are nice and squishy. The yarn I used is Mint Rain Yarns, and it is the soft sock in the bubblegum colorway, and this was sent to me as yarn support for this pattern. And you can get a discount at Mint Rain Yarns on Etsy, and right now there's right now till October 31st, till Halloween, you can get 10% off by using the code Stitched in Sweden. So definitely check that out. She's got a lot of different colorways on there, and these just, I mean, the yarn just turned out really, really nice after I washed it. I mean, it was nice to work with while I was knitting with it too, but in particular when you just have like crisply blocked socks, it's really nice. So these I'm hoping to get some pictures of this week, and then the pattern should be released next week for free. Because I've heard back from most of my test knitters, and it seems that there are not... I've made the changes. There was a couple changes that needed to be made, and that's it. So it should be ready, and they just need some pictures taken. These have a 1x1 rib. I talked about this last week, how there's more stitches for the 1x1 rib than there are for the leg. And then it has a sort of arrow chevron down the leg and the top of the foot. There is a slip stitch heel, flap, and gusset for the heel. You can put in whatever heel you want. And then there is a rounded toe, and you can also put in whatever toe you want. But this was actually one of the first times I've used, I think it is the first time I used the rounded toe, and I really like it. So these are finished, and I'm just going to get some pictures of those, hopefully this week, and I'll get the pattern out to you really soon. So for the technique tip this week, I would just really encourage you to try the tubular cast on, because it just really ups the level of your knitting. It's just one of those details that really can add a lot to a project and make it look really professional, I think. So like I mentioned, Ysolda has really great techniques on her blog. It's called Technique Thursday, and she doesn't post every Thursday, but she has a good selection of techniques already on there. And the tubular cast on with provisional yarn or the long tail method are both on there. She also has a technique for the tubular bind off, so I will definitely be checking that out for the neckline of my sweater. The only other technique tip this week is not really a technique tip, but I mentioned with casting on more stitches for ribbing and then decreasing directly before starting a stockinette section to avoid the arm pucker if you don't like that, like me. So I thought that I would share with you this week, just briefly, a little peek into one of my knitting notebooks. I have several, and I use them all for different things, I guess you could say. But a lot of times what I have in here are things that I don't want to show you directly, because it's related to a design or just an idea that I have. But because this week I'm working on the Cybella pullover, I made a little page for that, and I thought I could show you because it's not my pattern, it's somebody else's. So here's what I have. This is just, my knitting notebook, sort of. So usually I have the pattern name, and if it's a pattern by me, then I just usually write the date, like month and year. And I make some notes here. If I'm going to make any changes to the pattern, so I'll just read you what I wrote. I said, starting with the sleeves to try and get every bit of enjoyment out of working with this yarn and to not end up dreading them or not knitting them for months later on. Tubular cast on with less stitches, 56, I mean, that's not the number in the pattern anyway. Decreased directly at beginning of stockinette to avoid arm pucker, increased in pairs on rows 22, 37, 44. Because I increased on random rows and I wasn't following the pattern, I wanted to be able to do it on the second sleeve. ended on row 131 plus the ribbing. So those are the notes that I have so far, and I will also add more notes when I do shaping for it. So you can see I drew myself a little schematic here. I really like drawing schematics. I think they're fun, and it gives you the chance to write where you might want to make changes. So I think I'm going to add some length to the back of the sweater, and I also want to add some short rows to lengthen or to raise the back neck, because it is a yoked cardigan, a pullover that's worked from the bottom up. So I'm going to add some short rows right before I attach the arms, which will help raise the back up a little bit. And then I'll also add some right at the back neck, which will raise it up even more, so that there's a definite difference between the front and the back of the sweater. And so you don't get this like sweater riding up on your neck feeling. I'm also going to do some short rows on the bottom. Oops. I'm going to do some short rows on the bottom to make the back longer than the front. And so I just kind of write those notes in there. I wrote that I did the tubular cast on. I'm going to find a tubular bind off, which I did find one on Ysolda's blog. I wrote the yarn that I used and the needle size and the gauge that I was getting. And I put one of the tags in here, and then I just have this postcard because it's pretty and I like looking at it. And that might come out later if I want to write more notes on that side, but that's it. So I have lots of pages with, I want to show you the chart, but like I have other pages where I draw some idea for a design, and then sometimes I have the chart, which is what I'm covering up, and then I have the yarn tag so that you can see both sides of it. Sometimes I draw a schematic directly in, or I can show you this one too. This is for my new shawl design. So I taped in the schematic that I drew on a separate paper there, and I taped in the yarn tags, and I just write some notes about it. So that's it. Let's see. So upcoming, I was going to tell you some exciting sneak peek, which is that I have been working on a collaboration with one of my favorite yarn dyers, and we're getting closer and closer to being ready to release this pattern and kit. So it's really exciting, for me, especially because I just admire this person's dyeing so much, and I think she has a really beautiful aesthetic for everything. So if you did this test knit for me a while ago, it was a while ago, and I asked you not to share any pictures of it, and I know it's hard when you knit it so long ago and you want to share, and so if you have been waiting, it's very soon, and I will of course share more with you about that when the time is here. But just a little preview, it will be a shawl design, and there will be a kit with the yarn and some other things associated with it coming very soon, so something to look forward to for upcoming. But I think that is about it for this week. Thomas came back a couple minutes ago, and he's sitting in the kitchen being quiet. But I just have to show you something that he found at the grocery store today, which is really random and really exciting. Goldfish. Goldfish are one of my favorite snacks for a really long time, and you can't get them in Sweden, but apparently now you can, so yay! Goldfish and Skittles have come to Sweden. Now, if only they had corn tortillas and more delicious salsa, I think it would be good. I think I would, yeah. But anyway, so I think I'm going to finish my goldfish and not finish them. I just have a little bowl. But I'm gonna go have some of those and we will make something for lunch and enjoy the rest of this sunny day. So I hope you have plenty of time for knitting this week, and as always, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them in the Ravelry group, or sometimes I answer them directly in the group, in the thread there for questions and suggestions, and sometimes I save them to answer on this show, kind of depending on what type of question it is. So if you have any questions, I always love to hear from you, and I'm happy to answer them. So until next week, happy knitting, and I'll talk to you then. Bye!